Чего?
Andrei Tarkovsky is a director that requires no introductions for most people acquainted with the art of filmmaking. He has been mentioned in most previous videos on this channel, and his influence in the filmmaking world can be described as hugely pervasive, especially due to having crafted films of distinct identity without resemblance to any other filmmaker while alive, these being highly regarded for their oniric atmosphere that blends profound philosophical meditations, expressive visual poetry, lyrical ruminations on life and art, languid and contemplative pace, refined and immaculate formal presentation with long takes, suggestive and organic soundscape weaving, entrancing dream sequences, masterful discipline and administration of time, strong metaphor and recurrent visual and audio motifs, and superlative actor direction, all stringed and harnessed by an inventive and somewhat rebellious but extremely sensible spirit with an eye for the ephemeral, the unspoken, the ineffable, the mystical and universal, the sum of its parts resulting in a transcendental, unparalleled whole cinematic experience that draws ever more devotees, thanks also to quality YouTube content being produced every day in an attempt to introduce younger audiences to his work. This short video miniseries intends to offer a comprehensive explanation of a film by the renowned director that is often overlooked and eclipsed by other timeless works of art by the same person. In it, a historical context and an instruction or suggestion on how to engage with the film will be provided, as well as a meticulous study of its myriad themes, characters, visual features, and how they all connect in an intricate web bearing the potential to touch any viewer that lays eyes on it. This demonstration will be based mostly on Tarkovsky's own outlook, history and interests, drawn from his writings, speeches and interviews, so as to offer a plausible path to reach out and promote a dialogue with this distinguished artist while occasionally disclosing original perspectives. As the goal is to reveal Tarkovsky as an artist with something to say to people of all times, all nationalities and of all ages, but most of all to be truthful, this exercise will be humbly devoid of anachronistic fantasies based on contemporary political trends and convoluted philosophical theories, striving instead to present reasonable and accessible explanations for all listeners in regards to its expansive content. While Tarkovsky's praise and recognition, when based on a superficial or external knowledge, tends to gravitate almost exclusively towards Stalker and Zerkalo, both obviously phenomenal masterpieces and miracles of filmmaking on their own, more informed viewers will certainly acknowledge also the brilliance of Soliaris and Andrei Rublev, and possibly Offred and Ivan's childhood as well, if their curiosity enticed them enough to get there. In terms of feature films, this leaves Tarkovsky's penultimate cinematic incursion slightly shrouded and begets a reputation of a good yet underachieving effort, which as one will see is a little less than a grave injustice. Being narrowly pressed between colossal cinematic paragons on both sides, since it follows two crowning achievements, in fact, unbridled magnum opuses and cinematic diamonds of world renown, more precisely Stalker and Zerkalo, and precedes the monumental apex of humanistic grandeur with bottomless psychological, philosophical and religious resonance known as Offred, or the Sacrifice, Nostalghia seems, to many, destined to be forever remembered as a more discreet, austere, unobtrusive and perhaps cryptic creation from a great artist, a work seldom discussed and even less understood, as one critic has put it. In the following minutes and subsequent videos, an informed reevaluation of Nostalghia will take place, in an attempt to showcase its true value, an opportunity to shine proudly and individually away from the blinding glare of its surrounding illustrious filmographic family. Nostalghia marks a turning point for Tarkovsky's career, as it is his first film produced outside the USSR after running into a series of obstacles in his homeland, the main catalyzer for his departure being the stoppage halfway into production of his new project, The First Day, by production company Kino, after the differences between the production script and the shooting script were noted, particularly due to the criticism directed towards the Soviet authorities' enforcement of atheism. After this episode, Tarkovsky was so disappointed he vowed never to work again on the Soviet Union, which inspired him to film Nostalghia in Italy, after first visiting and traveling with his friend and eminent screenwriter Tonino Guerra, already famous then for his wondrous work with names such as Michelangelo Antonioni, Vittorio De Sica, Federico Fellini, and Francesco Rosi. It's worth noting also that Tonino Guerra would go on to write together and help create some of Theodoros Angelopoulos' most representative and wonderful films like The Beekeeper, Landscape in the Mist, The Suspended Step of the Stork, and Eternity and a Day, with Angelopoulos being one of poetic cinema's most renowned torchbearers and a remarkable disciple of Tarkovsky's tradition. Though Nostalghia initiated production with funding from Soviet Film, this was withdrawn at one point, forcing Tarkovsky to rely on the remaining budget from the Italian state television, RAI, and French film company Gaumont, and scraping scenes set in Russia, opting instead to reproduce them in Italy, which according to him actually benefited Nostalghia, for the locations found were better than the ones picked in Moscow. Tarkovsky explains in his book Sculpting in Time that he wished to make a movie that would explore the nostalgia felt by Russians traveling or living abroad and their noted difficulties in assimilation due to attachment to their past, culture, roots and family. To achieve this, he wrote a protagonist for Nostalghia named Andrei Gorchakov, a Russian history professor and expert of Italian architecture that is researching in Italy the life of a composer called Pavel Sosnovsky, a fictional figure but based on a real composer named Maxim Berezovsky, whose admirable music is currently going through your speakers or headphones. Gorchakov's stay in the country reflects Sosnovsky's own 18th century adventure in Italy, but Tarkovsky willfully avoids the temptation of presenting the postcard Italy most people are acquainted with, preferring instead to examine inner landscapes, specifically the protagonist's disorientation and peculiar sense of alienation intrinsically bound to the foreign enchantment. While spectators familiar with Tarkovsky's style know exactly what to expect both in form and substance, as has been described at the start of this video, Nostalghia manages to still surprise with its focused, though others would describe it as cold, sense of aesthetic ascetism, understated but penetrating psychological malaise, and the infusion of a dynamic yet tense screen duo, much reminiscent of the 50s and 60s work by the already mentioned Antonioni. Though conflicting views and communication obstacles among couples or friends has been present in Soliaris, Stalker and Zerkalo, Nostalghia delves deeper in this territory by expanding the complexity of communication not simply through the interplay of different languages at work on the same stage, but essentially from human to human, and by analyzing the exchange of worldviews and different perspectives between two conscious, albeit very different examples of man and woman. In an interview with Tony Mitchell, Tarkovsky resumes this movie and this aspect by explaining that Nostalgia is about the impossibility of people living together without really knowing one another, and about the problems arising from the necessity of getting to know one another. This subject and the aforementioned disposition of Gorchakov will be dealt with on a future video, detailing more precisely the nature, traits and actions between the film's characters. Concerning the film on a more general level, Nostalgia has been criticized by some for its alleged obscurity of meaning, lack of action, arid narrative, plodding pace, and minimalistic vocabulary of ideas. However, the truth is the movie is quite far from being that which is commonly accused of, except perhaps when it comes to its leisurely tempo, which shouldn't surprise any Tarkovsky connoisseur. This sort of criticism is likely to reflect in fact a poverty of knowledge, unrealistic expectations, and conceptual deafness prevalent perhaps in criticism used to more mainstream and less demanding cinematic ventures. It is then necessary to tackle these somewhat absurd allegations and untangle the individual tesserae of this monolithic mosaic in order to establish the value of the film from an honest spectator's standpoint, and one way this may be achieved is to single out some of the questions and assertions expressed by various characters in different occasions, as this will shed light on the richly decorated conceptual tapestry knitted within the dialogue of the film, even before getting to an investigation of how they mingle and help propel the narrative. Take for example the sequence at the beginning, when Andrei and Eugenia visit the church where Piero della Francesca's Madonna del Parto is held almost as a sacred icon like one sees in Orthodox Christianity to inspire conception on its female supplicant.
Che cosa deve succedere?
Tutto quello che vuoi. Tutto quello che ti serve.
What is the role, nay the essence of religion, and how is faith supposed to work if one applies to it only casually and without sacrifice on one's own? Doesn't that go against the principles preached by Christianity, based on its highest and most sacred example, its Savior? Isn't there the risk of being unable to partake in the grace conceded by it, whichever the way, for not having fully embraced it as it was meant to? Would the world be different today, perhaps, had not religion become a mere tradition or assembly of rites to be performed mechanically, had people not strayed from it to the point of not understanding it at all anymore? Notice how Tarkovsky subtly replies to this question with a praying girl in the church observed by Eugenia before leaving.
Perché solo le donne si raccomandano tanto?
Why is it that women show themselves to be more devout than men? Is it because they are pure, or because they suffer more? Is it because they precisely look at the core of belief and deeply trust on its capacity to inspire the world as a community, instead of looking at it from a purely selfish, detached, and uncharitable way? Is it because their humane outlook derived from their crucial role in our species' self-preservation inspires them to see the positive influence and qualities more than the flaws? And if so, is that a good or a bad thing? What's in the nature of women and whence does it come? What and how can men learn from it? Tarkovsky states in an interview with Hoberman and Bachmann that "I respect the woman in women. There is no doubt that women are human beings like men, but their function and role in human existence is quite different from the function and role of men," which leads us to the next argument thrown between Eugenia and the priest.
Io so un uomo semplice, ma secondo me una donna serve per far dei figli.
Are women meant to have children? And if so, is that all they're meant to do? To conceive, raise and educate children with patience and self-sacrifice? Or do they also have other duties, prospects and capacities? Is it possible to assert that women are meant to conceive, much like men are meant to fertilize, without constraining both genres to just that, so as to cherish it as something beautiful and sacred to a degree necessary, but ultimately voluntary? Bearing in mind the place and characters, could there be a missing dialogue between women and religion that would further illuminate the roles and reshape the relationship between the two? It's no doubt interesting to read Tarkovsky examining the subject on a curiously heated interview with Irena Brezna, eventually asserting at one point that the woman is the symbol of love, and the woman gives the meaning of life. It is not a coincidence that the Virgin Mary is a symbol of love, as a virgin who bore the Savior. Whatever the answers to these questions, it's quite impressive that in just 5 minutes there's more substance in the dialogue, though heavily stripped down, and food for thought than what could be accounted for in many conventional films put together. And if one were to stop and ponder about these questions, the inner dialogue that would follow would certainly exceed the duration of the film by far. Tarkovsky states in Sculpting in Time that cinema should be a means of exploring the most complex problems of our time, as vital as those which for centuries have been the subject of literature, music and painting, which binds the film medium to a plain philosophical commitment, and this idea is present at work through questions such as the ones highlighted, in the pursuit of sparking a dialogue in the spectator's mind and world. While 3 examples from a brief excerpt of a long sequence were demonstrated, there are plenty more ideas being exchanged throughout the film that are meaningful and worthy to meditate upon, many of them particularly relevant today, some examples of which are: is poetry, in fact art, translatable? If so, can it be ever fully translated, or will it always remain incomplete for a foreigner? Do we really know each other? If so, how do we communicate ourselves fully without risk of misinterpretation? Are frontiers and boundaries somewhat absurd and meaningless in the grand scheme of mankind? Could the world benefit from taking a different stance? What is madness? Can one's conception of madness differ from other or be confused by ignorance of another's psyche? What is one's purpose in the world? What should we strive to do while here in order to lead a better life? What do men expect of women? Do they all apprehend them merely from a sexual standpoint? Why is it so difficult to have a platonic love story, untarnished by sensual craving? Are great, pure love stories only the subject of art? Can one ever completely cut the link to his homeland? Are we destined to suffer a bitter sense of longing whenever we leave the place where we were born? Should we reconsider our current relationship with nature? Are we perhaps heading towards a darker place from which we cannot come back? These examples would suffice to refute any criticism or indictment of Nostalghia's purported crabbedness or enigmatic nature, the clarity and directness of Tarkovsky's inquiries being manifestly graspable by any spectator willing to employ common apprehension capacity. Looking at the Internet Movie Database, it's clear that for a large portion of spectators, Nostalghia remains somewhat overlooked, being Tarkovsky's less watched and less reviewed film. The reason for its tepid reception by some of the critique and current neglection as some sort of an underachiever effectively eludes common perception, especially considering that at a time the film was prevented only by Sergei Bondarchuk, as the head of the Soviet delegation and member of the jury at Cannes, from winning the prestigious Palme d'Or. The result, however, was the attribution on the same festival of the prize of the ecumenical jury, the Vipresi Awards of the International Film Critics, and the award for Best Director, the latter shared with Robert Bresson for his tremendous masterwork L'Argent, and Bresson being a director that Tarkovsky himself much respected and revered, having even written in Sculpting in Time that he is perhaps the only man in cinema to have achieved the perfect fusion of the finished work with a concept theoretically formulated beforehand. What's more, when asked by Valia Liakovino on which film he felt the greatest affection, Tarkovsky replied that, "I love all my films. I don't know how to answer. Perhaps I feel closest to Nostalghia. In it, I find myself." On a later stage, one will see how and why Nostalghia bore such great importance for Tarkovsky, what distinguishes it from his previous films. Hopefully, this miniseries will help more people discover the film and understand it, so that it becomes more widely known and fairly assessed. Stay tuned for the next video, which will deal more precisely with some of the governing ideas that drive the narrative. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to like, share and subscribe to the channel for more on classic film explorations. Thank you and see you next time.
Zoe! Dove sei? Zoe! Perché non rispondi?